We had a strange 1.5 magnitude earthquake in the state of Maine today, and it was reported to USGS as being felt. Volcanoes of Maine. Maine has 5 volcanoes. 4 of them are in a 100-mile area. Now, we've talked about Maine, beautiful Maine. We have all these rolling hills, beautiful lakes, and we never realized that Maine has 5 volcanoes, 4 of them in a 100-mile distance. And these are the rocks of those volcanoes, as you can see, and we'll talk a little bit about them. But first, the earthquake. Magnitude 1.5, very shallow, 5.7 kilometers depth, reportedly felt by 8 people, but of course a lot more. As we know, the areas of especially the East Coast is very soft. Maine is just a couple of hours off from Montreal. I used to live in Montreal. I told you my parents were both architects, and they explained to me that the sediment was so soft in Quebec, in Montreal, for example, that no matter how many floors you had above ground, you would have to have that many floors below ground. Now, if you had a 5-story building, you'd have to have 5 basements, 5-floor basements. That's why a lot of the neighborhoods in Montreal have subways reaching each neighborhood, because of the fact that the sediment is so soft, it doesn't take that much to dig it out and have a proper transportation system so that people don't freeze themselves over the surface, especially during the winter, which is really cruel winters. So the East Coast has very soft sedimentation, and that's why the earthquakes are felt 10 times more than they are on the West Coast. And even though this was only a 1.5 in Sebattis, Maine, it was today at, it was today at 11 UTC. That's, let's see, that at the time is 6 p.m. local time, 6 p.m. Okay, so it just happened a little while ago. Shallow earthquake in Boston. And that's not the only one, that we had one on the 17th of February as well. That was a 1.9 in New Hampshire. And that was again 5 magnitude, reportedly felt by 1 person, but it's right next to Maine, New Hampshire, at the border of New Hampshire with Maine. So what's happening with these earthquakes? First of all, let's go to the regional information. Earthquakes in New England. People in New England and its geological extension southward through Long Island have felt small earthquakes and suffered damage from infrequent larger ones since colonial times. Moderately damaging earthquakes strike somewhere in the region every few decades. Smaller earthquakes are felt roughly twice a year. The Boston area was damaged 3 times in 28 years in the middle 1700s, and New York City was damaged in 1737 and 1884. The largest known New England earthquake occurred in 1638, magnitude 6.5 in Vermont or New Hampshire, and 1755, magnitude 5.8 offshore from Cape Ann, northeast of Boston. The Cape Ann earthquake caused severe damage to the Boston waterfront. The most recent New England earthquake to cause moderate damage occurred in 1940, magnitude 5.6 in central New Hampshire. Earthquakes in the central and eastern United States, although less frequent than the western United States, are typically felt over a much broader region. East of the Rockies, an earthquake can be felt over an area as much as 10 times larger than a similar magnitude earthquake on the West Coast. Magnitude 4 eastern U.S. earthquake can be felt at many places as far as 60 miles from where it occurred, and it infrequently causes damage near its source. Now the faults, earthquakes everywhere occur on faults within bedrock, usually miles deep, although some New England earthquakes occur at shallower depths. And these, of course, here we're talking about today's quakes, and the one on the 17th were shallow. Most of New England's and Long Island bedrock was assembled as continents collided to form a supercontinent 500 to 300 million years ago, raising the northern Appalachian Mountains. The rest of the bedrock formed when the supercontinent rifted apart about 200 million years ago to form what are now the northeastern United States, the Atlantic Ocean, and Europe. Now, concerning the Maine volcanoes, most people have no idea that we have volcanoes in Maine. But if you look at let's take a look together. We'll take a look at the. Okay, here we are at the Atlantic Ocean. This is Maine right here, and this is the East Coast seamount. The underwater volcanoes. There are 30 volcanoes here, if not more, but 30. Okay, that's Bermuda there. Okay, 30 volcanoes. And they're pointing towards Maine, right here, Maine. Not only Maine, they're also pointing towards New York, as you can see here, and Boston, Massachusetts. We have had earthquakes here recently, and we've had in Boston, we've had upstate New York, near the Great Lakes. We've had off of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, around Lake Erie. We've had them in Rhode Island, just across from the tip of Long Island, and in Maine. Here we are. We've even had in the area of Montreal. Let's go to our, okay, here we have here. 2.9 magnitude, even though USGS has it at 2. This one is in Quebec, okay? So this was before the Maine quake. What time was this? Local time? Yeah, that's UTC time is 1:59 UTC. Whereas this one was UTC, what time is that UTC? Oh, that's the one before that, okay. UTC is 11 p.m. 11 p.m., whereas this one was about 9 hours beforehand, okay? So this one, I guess, as you can see, is very close. But we've had Canada still, okay, that's New Brunswick. So which is pretty close to Maine, as we know. Okay, that's New Hampshire. That was on the 17th, as we saw before. They have it here as a 2.4 magnitude, whereas the USGS has it as a 1.9. You see the difference here? Maybe that's why the 1.5 was felt and reported felt, because Canada would have had it like a 2.5 perhaps, or 2 something. You know, why would Canada have this as a, New Hampshire is 2.4, whereas here they have it as a 1.9. You see what I mean? So who's right and who's wrong? Anyway, they're felt. And this is an extension of the New Madrid seismic zone, which is actually the New Madrid Rift Valley. And that's the extension of that from what we see here. We don't have them plotted here, but Canada has enough plotted. So this is the area of the seamount pointing towards this thing here. And that's Maine, and you have 5 volcanoes there pointing this way. So yes, Maine does have volcanoes, and they were considered among the world's biggest. According to Becky Oskin of Live Science, Maine has supervolcanoes, yes, and their eruptions could have been among the world's biggest ever on Earth. Geologist Sheila Seaman reported at the Geological Society of America's annual meeting, long before there were these things called supervolcanoes, we've known about giant, big, horrific, silicic volcanic eruptions. She's from the University of Massachusetts' Amherst. She says the most massive of these blasts in recent history was Toba, which blew up in Indonesia 2.5 million years ago. The explosion heaved 700 cubic miles of magma out of the Earth's crust. Around 420 million years ago, a series of super eruptions dropped thick piles of ash and lava fragments along the proto-east coast of North America. There are at least 4 volcanoes spreading out along 100 miles of Maine's coast. The huge volcanic rock piles are consistent with caldera-forming eruptions. These explosions empty a magma chamber, leaving a gaping wound in the earth. We can think of, for example, what happened with Yellowstone or San Juan volcanic field in Colorado. And since they formed, the ancient volcanic layers have been tilted up by tectonic forces, providing a top-to-bottom slice through a supervolcano. For example, the Île aux Hauts part of Acadia, the Acadia National Park of Maine, exposes the heart of a volcano. The whole magma chamber is lying on its side, according to seamen. And building on years of geologic mapping and tectonic reconstruction by other researchers, seamen traced a direct connection between the cooled and crystallized magma chambers called plutons and their enormous ash deposits. Volcanic rock layer on Maine's Cranberry Island have a 2,300 foot thick layer of welded tuff, a rock formed from volcanic ash. This welded tuff from Toba's most recent blowout is 2,000 feet thick. So the one in Maine is even thicker, 2,300 foot thick. Now, on the remote isle of Île aux Hauts, part of Acadia National Park, the volcanic rocks here in Maine are more than 3 miles thick. They're capped by an immense ash flow more than 3,200 feet thick. Seaman estimates the caldera at Mount Desert Island would have been about 15 miles long, 15 wide. For comparison, Toba's caldera is 62 miles long and 18 miles wide. The coast is so serene and so beautiful and has such a terrible violent past, she said. And she thinks that the super eruptions struck between 424 million and 419 million years ago in the Silurian period, after islands the size of Japan slammed into the eastern edge of Laurentia, where we have the area of the, St. Lawrence River, the continental core of North America. And afterwards, tectonic forces stretched and tore Earth's crust behind the collision zone, making space for magma to rise from the mantle, the layer beneath the crust. So that's the story of what happened here. It was terrible. And the beautiful serene landscapes of Maine do show areas of rocks, pictures, and crushing formation that formed about 450, 470 million years ago, resulting in many different explosions. And the main volcano eruptions creating the Cushing Formation happened before the existence of the Himalayas, of the Alps, and even the dinosaurs. The volcanoes are now eroded and gone, but visitors can still see things like rocks joined together around the edges of Maine's islands. Cranberry Island also shows signs of volcanic activity in the form, as we said, of this 2,300 foot thick layer of welded tuff, which is a rock formation from the volcanic ash. Scientists believe all of Maine's super eruptions took place around 424 million to 419 million years ago. So, as we said, this earthquake was felt. It was 1.9 according to USGS, and 1.5 according to USGS. But the one that took place in New Hampshire, 1.9, was reported by the Canadian Geological Society as 2.4. So we have some kind of a huge divergence in the way they're measuring earthquakes. Canada has them much larger. Maybe that's why they are reported felt to USGS, and USGS has them a lot lower for some reason. Anyway, all of you there on the East Coast, please be very careful. If you'd like to join me on my Patreon account, you will hear content not covered by mainstream media. These riveting stories will be based on my research, and I will state my opinions and give my personal insight on diverse and controversial subjects and world events not covered by mainstream media, and not supported by YouTube guidelines. So whatever I have on my Patreon, most of those will not be on my YouTube channel. Please consider becoming a member today. More of the most significant and important videos will be on my Patreon channel. Your support helps me to continue my research and keeps this YouTube channel alive. And we depend on your support, your generous charity, because we help economically challenged families here in Athens, Greece, in Kapota, and we also help the young generation with university tuition and the community around our church. Thank you.